Welcome to M&A Plus, the art after the deal, where integrators are the heroes and where we get to explore the nuances and complexities of mergers and acquisitions. Today, we're thrilled to have Jim, an M&A integration powerhouse. He's had senior roles at Microsoft, PayPal, and VMware. Jim's expertise spans everything from managing multi-acquisition environments to working seamlessly with legal teams, conducting due diligence, driving value creation, and leveraging technology in the integration process. Join us as we have a conversation about Jim's journey and discover what it takes to master the art of post-deal integration at the highest level. So, Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lisa.
So based on our conversations before, I know we have a lot to talk about and a lot to cover, and we may or may not be able to cover everything that I want to cover in this. But one of the first questions I wanted to ask you, given your background and extensive experience, is, how many total integrations have you been involved in to date?
So I have been involved in far more than I can even remember. So I quit counting at 100. I would imagine it's not 200 yet, but it's probably mid 100s, 150, give or take. And whether that's direct management of a deal or managing a team managing a deal, it's been a long road and a lot of deals.
Wow, over 100. So would you say many of them were, large scale deals, mid-sized deals, and what types of integrations were they? Software or like what's kind of the breakdown of the different types of deals that you were involved in?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. So I think my experience falls into probably how you would categorize mostly the deal spectrum writ large, meaning there's fewer really large deals than there are medium deals, and there's fewer medium deals than smaller deals. So I've done small 4-person acqui-hires, and I've done 4,000 employee, tens of billions of dollars in revenue, global footprint deals. I've done some hardware deals, not a lot. Most of my experience is in software, which I actually think they both have their challenges, but I'm going to suggest that software is harder because it's hard to value an output that starts with hammering on a keyboard, which is what software is. And that's not an indictment on, it's hard, right? How do you type something that then out pops a product? That for me is complicated because I'm not a software engineer.
Mm-hmm. So going back to the beginning of your career, so how did you get involved and what were you doing before you got into M&A?
Well, if we go way back, I was a bartender and a ski instructor. So I had nothing to do with M&A back then. So I started with Sun Microsystems back in the early 80s. I was employee number 190 at Sun Microsystems.
Okay.
And yes, that's a hardware company, but it also, as you know, had Unix as the operating system. And I was a stockroom manager and a receiving manager and a shipping manager. And that was my introduction into high tech. I remember interviewing there and their technology was workstations. That's what they built, hardware workstations. I had no idea what a hardware workstation was. Zero. I had no idea whatsoever. And then they walked me around the stockroom and said, "Oh, side panels, hard drives, PCB boards, chips, etc." So I was an ops guy, and then I got into cost accounting, which surprises a lot of people because I'm probably the last and least likely accountant most people would ever meet. My wife's a CPA, so she always wonders how I got that job. So cost accounting became an FP&A job, and I was in FP&A manager, leader, division controller through 1999 when I did my first M&A transaction with a company called Mentor Graphics, which has since been acquired by Siemens.
Okay. Awesome. I know you've worked in a lot of environments where there was multiple acquisitions, and obviously everybody knows who Microsoft, PayPal, and VMware are pretty much. I had kind of a question about that. I wanted to get your perspective on why companies do so many M&As, and do you think it's because it's a shortcut to innovation? And why are they making those decisions rather than investing, more organically? And what is your kind of view on that strategy?
It's been an interesting experience in that regard. So organic growth by definition is purposefully slow. Like you can only hire so many software engineers and you can only hire so many sales reps to sell software and ramp them up to a level of productivity. And so when an opportunity is presented to a company like a Microsoft or a PayPal or a VMware, I wouldn't call it a shortcut. I would say it's largely many people will laugh at this, it's largely a well thought out approach to growth. But most people would probably like, yeah, no, most M&A is not well thought out. It's not very purposeful and it frequently doesn't succeed. And so it is a path to faster growth, whether it's revenue or product, technology, global footprint, etc. But it's a little bit random in terms of how that becomes value creation. It's never the same from deal to deal. The principles are the same, but the execution can vary wildly from deal to deal. I have frequently said, and more often experienced, smaller deals are many times harder than bigger deals. Smaller deals are typically companies in earlier days or years of their existence. They don't have maybe necessarily the most experienced team by definition. They're trying to figure out how they're going to grow. And just by the fact that they might be up for sale suggests that their original plans, unless that was their exit strategy, maybe they finally realize, like, you know what, we can't do this alone. We've tried and we're not going to be able to do it. So we're going to talk to some companies about a strategic move for us. So, but it's different at every company. And so a Microsoft who has, the balance sheet from heaven can go out and do a lot of deals. In 2008, when I was at Microsoft, we did 28 deals in that year. That's a lot of deals, right? That's over 2 a month. I became sort of a mercenary in that process, and I did 8 of those 28 deals in that year. And I would not recommend that to anybody. It's not good for your family life. It's not good for your mental health. I think that was the year my beard turned white. It went from dark to white literally in 1 year doing all those deals. But, Microsoft can do that because of their size and scale and experience. PayPal did not do a lot of deals, but the ones we did were very strategic and very targeted. So we were able to drive value in a very purposeful, well thought out manner. And VMware was another high velocity acquirer. And we did a lot of really good deals. Some people might think about, but M&A, that there's that statistic, which I know you're well aware of 70% of all M&A transactions fail. All I have is my experience. I would say I don't believe that. It comes down to the definition. What is the definition of success? Is it purely financial? So many times I've done a deal where there's literally like a CTO that is just a hidden gem that becomes like the lead architect for the entire company. But nobody ever ascribes value to that role and to that outcome. Whereas I'm like, that person was a gift in this deal. Like, financials be damned. This male or female, man or woman, it's like, this CTO is a rock star. And we found it out after the deal closed.
So returns may not be expected, but it's more like an investment sometimes. So just because you don't turn around value right away, it doesn't mean it's a failure, I guess.
No. And I'd like, in my personal life, I can't say, 70% of what I do a failure. It's like, no, it's like how you define it. Like, if I run a big long race that I do and somehow don't hit a timeout, a cutoff, there's learnings out of that experience. So I don't consider that a failure. I consider it part of my opportunity to grow and learn.
So I know that we had a pretty good conversation before we got on this podcast about due diligence. And I know it's one of those subjects that people, it's not the most fun topic to talk about. But I think it was really interesting to hear you talk about the different types of due diligence. So, most people, when they hear due diligence, it's like pre-deal. We have to find out all these things. We find everything out about something, to buy that we can make a decision on it. And here's all the different lanes that we look at things. But from your point of view, because you've been in integration roles, there's lots of different types of due diligence, and I'm also familiar with that as well. And in what I do, I had separated it into 3 types, and you had mentioned 4 types. So let me hear you explain the 4 types of due diligence that you told me about previously.
Yeah. So 1, I will give most of my due diligence experience and quote unquote expertise came out of my work at Microsoft. My original project coming into Microsoft was to revamp their due diligence process. And this was coming out of Mentor Graphics, which is, a much, much, much smaller company. And we really didn't have an integration team. As the division controller, I created the due diligence approach. And I'd asked my boss at the time, the senior VP of the division, like, so what is integration? What do you want me to do? He explained it to me very clearly and somewhat tersely. So the 4 types. So there's preliminary due diligence, which is the due diligence that's done to do we want to approach this deal? And can we come up with a valuation for this deal and our strategic rationale? What is this deal potentially going to help solve for us? A lot of times I ascribe due diligence just to the number of pages of questions involved because that's kind of it, right? That's kind of the metric. So there's preliminary due diligence, and then assuming that leads to a letter of intent, you then get into confirmatory due diligence, is when you ask the multiple number, hundreds of questions. Included in that, the work crosses over, is then that leads to the operational due diligence. Confirmatory due diligence, in my experience, is largely about, can we confirm the value we've offered this company? Are there any deal breakers, any toxic contracts, play to your expertise? Like, you find those and you go, we need to talk about this, whether it's a commercial agreement or even an escrow agreement that might not be appropriate for the business, whatever, right? There's not a lot, but there's several of those where you're like, okay, we need to talk about this in confirmatory.
So that's during confirmatory. Would you say that the biggest bulk of contract review occurs in confirmatory stage?
I would say, I'll throw out percentage. I think 80% of it happens in confirmatory, but there is some level, 20% in prelim DD.
Okay.
When you really need to, when you ask that question, do you have any executive agreements that might be prohibitive from a cost perspective to buy out certain executives? Do you have any material escrow agreements where potentially the IP is with a company that we might not want to do business with? Things like that should be probably more in preliminary than confirmatory. But then confirmatory should confirm those earlier questions and responses. I'm sure you've had this same experience where you get through a deal and you find something out and you're like, why didn't you guys tell us about this? And I more than often have because you guys didn't ask.
I've seen deals where they're already closed and they missed a lot of things in customer agreements, like rebates or fixed pricing that they're actually losing money on. So I asked, when were you guys going to look at all the agreements? And one of the reasons they didn't look at everything is because everything was dispersed around the world and it was hard to get access to everything. But to me, I would kind of want to know what's in them before I bought it. It was a $4 billion deal. It wasn't small. Right. So do you see that kind of stuff happening? And because of my field, of course, I'm asking you specifically about the contract review because I've seen it where it became a big issue later on.
Yeah, no, I think that happens in every deal, quite honestly. I do think, there's the concept of deal fatigue, whether it's to a specific deal or run rate or volume of deals, where people are like, I just need to know the really important stuff and I'm going to kind of trust the rest of it. But it frequently comes out, those findings come out in a conversation or a discussion with certain execs post-close. And you're sort of, most of it can be remediated, quite honestly, but it usually involves money, right? There's a financial impact to remediating those things. Yeah. You have to buy a customer out of a contract or an agreement, or you have to pay somebody to just stop doing what they're doing, whether it's an employee or a contract or a vendor. So, I think that happens a lot, I think. way more than people. But why would you talk about it afterwards other than behind closed doors? It's not something you need to share publicly, typically, unless it's a significant percentage of the valuation.
Okay, so that leads me to my next topic here, which is I thought you had some good input about working with legal teams during integration. And you had mentioned a legal team that you worked with at a company and why it was a good team and what should the legal team's approach be during integration that's helpful to the business?
Referencing that conversation, my experience with just a rock star legal team, an M&A legal team, and corporate was Microsoft. I learned a lot from them. Some of them even suggested they learned a few things from me, which was very generous of them. The thing I was taught and experienced at Microsoft was that their approach was that we are business partners with JDs. They rarely ever came into a meeting or a discussion. We're lawyers and we do this and you need to listen to what we're saying. And never had that experience. Never. It's like, how can we help you solve whatever business problems you need help solving from a legal perspective to make sure that we're the company and that this team, et cetera, and the deal leader are protected legally in the process. I mean, they were just generous with their patience with a bunch of us that wanted to go hard, go fast, and sometimes like, can we just not look at that right now? They're like, no, we're just going to tell you that's something we need to look at. And, and they were right. And that's where they looked at it, the impact to the business, but with with their legal background, their legal lens. So I have looked, and VMware had that same. PayPal had a great legal M&A legal team, small but informative, great business partners, and VMware's legal team was, I would suggest, the equivalent of the Microsoft team. Actually, a lot of them were former Microsoft when Microsoft was acquired, not acquired, but a lot of that team came from Microsoft.
Yeah, that's a good point. Understanding the business impact of things, because legal teams might sometimes look at things too much, too thoroughly for something that's really small, for example. But if the legal team has the mind of helping the business and understanding the impacts to the business, then they're going to be able to prioritize risk versus thoroughness versus speed, right? And I think that's a direction that the legal support is going in, basically. And you see it very kind of on steroids during an M&A because of the speed and because of all the different moving parts. I wanted to hear your perspective on how a great legal team supports an integration. And I think that's super important, actually.
Well, and I think all lawyers, in my experience, in corporate, are problem solvers. That's kind of the, it's like one of the key part of the job description. I think the difference between M&A lawyers, legal teams, and what I will broadly call corporate legal is that M&A they're more used to the pace, they're more used to the challenges, where the friction is, and how they can help they remove friction in the deal process. And I think whereas corporate lawyers tend to deal with big, lethargic legal issues that can kind of plod along because they're big and hairy, and you got to kind of look at them from 100 different angles, and this jurisdiction, that jurisdiction, regulatory, et cetera. That's a different pace, I would suggest. Whereas M&A is like, you got 60 days to figure this stuff out. So where's the line drawn in what we're going to pursue in terms of further information or decisions, and where we're going to say, we'll deal with that later, but to get to alignment. And I think M&A lawyers are always, always, always driving towards, this is the outcome we understand you guys are driving for. Has that changed at all? Because that can change their work and inform their work.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of adaptations that need to be made. Yeah, that's good. Okay. So switching gears to the next topic here is the topic around customers and partner relationships during integration. My question around that was, sometimes you kind of feel like when a company does an acquisition, they tell the customer or partner that nothing's going to change, everything's going to be the same. Yet you see all these significant internal changes, from the customer point of view. So do you think that trust can be damaged, and how do you mitigate that? And kind of what's your perspective on that side of the transaction?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like the fact that somebody would suggest that nothing's going to change based on an M&A transaction, like by definition, an M&A transaction is all about change. Mm-hmm. Everything's going to change. So what I push for in every deal is like just transparency and communication. And I think the sooner that is communicated to partners and customers and beyond, the better. Mm-hmm. Does that mean they need to be told everything? No. Should it be portrayed as this is what we're thinking about? Oh, by the way, we'd love to get your input on this. Like you wouldn't ask every customer partner, but the material ones, like certain transactional revenue threshold throughput. I think transparency is key. I've worked with a lot of teams where they don't want to be that transparent, which I always sort of roll my eyes at. Like, do you want me to not tell you everything I know about this deal? Like, how would? Well, no, but we're on the same side. It's like, well, are you saying the customers and the partners are not on the same? That's kind of where the revenue comes from. Would you want them to be on our side? And they bristle and puff their chest out, and you're like, this isn't rocket science. You tell them what you can tell them. You inform them. It's their decision whether they like it or not. But for us to pretend that they don't have that decision is probably short-sighted. So I think it's about transparency. And yes, there's a timing element to all this. When can you tell them what? And you've been part of this, I'm sure, where there are whisper conversations before any deal is legally and publicly announced.
Yeah.
And
the rumor mill, right?
It kind of gets a little squishy sometimes and uncomfortable, but like, look, off the record, I want to validate something with you. If we were to do the following, like my favorite phrase in some deals has been hypothetically speaking. Like, okay, so every time I ever hear hypothetically speaking, you're telling me or asking me something that has a very significant element of truth to it. So there's very little hypothetical about it, but let's not go down that rat hole, right? But hypothetically speaking, if we were to do the following, what would you think about that? I think there's nothing wrong with that, as long as it doesn't cross any legal lines or it's not written or discoverable, etc. Don't write it down in a notebook. But, it's probably not. And that'll make a lot of lawyers kind of nervous. So you have the conversation when you have the conversation.
So my next question is around value creation strategies. And do you ever feel like you're chasing synergies?
This is where I become sort of the cowboy of M&A. Like, I just recoil at the term synergies. Like, synergies are an Excel model that some really smart finance team pulled together. Top line synergies, bottom line synergies, cost synergies. Like, I get it. Can you measure them? Are they measurable? Are they quantifiable? It's really kind of like, how would you measure that synergy at a level where you can actually create information? You can drive all the data you want through an Excel spreadsheet, but how does that generate information whereby decisions can be made going forward? Did we hit that synergy? Did we not hit that synergy? So I believe that value creation happens post-close. I think valuation is acquired, pre-close, right? That's what the corp dev teams typically do. The real creation of value is post-close. And that's what the integration teams do. This is how we're going to drive the top line numbers. This is how we're going to drive headcount and costs. This is how we're going to influence growth, whether it's headcount or a global footprint. And I think having those conversations sooner rather than later just help kind of clear the air. It's like M&A is largely an outcome-driven exercise. What's the desired outcome? I typically call it the North Star. I've become lately more of a fan of because people hear North Star and, they think Galileo or something. It's like, I'm not Galileo. Just where are we going with this deal? Where do we believe the value is created and what's the timeline to get there? And when you get everybody, and again, if you keep it as simple as you can, then people can't deny that they don't understand it. And I've literally sat in meetings and driven processes where I ask people, do you understand the value we're trying to create with our work? And I will ask different people, whether the facilities team, the workplace team, the IT team, the HR team, the engineer or the BU that's driving, the engineering team or BU that's driving. Let's make sure everybody has the same definition of what success looks like in terms of driving value going forward. And it's really, it's not easy, but it shouldn't be that complicated.
So how do you keep things simplified?
I'm a big fan of the, I'm sure you've heard this before, but the concept of boulder, rock, pebbles. The boulders are the really, really big things you got to deal with. And I'm like, we're not going to the level of the rocks, which is the next level down, like the double click from the boulders. And the boulders are literally the value you're trying to drive. Is it a top line thing? How are we going to drive that? Do we need more salespeople? Do we need a broader global footprint? Do we need a different technology set? And this company provides that product set. And so I think it's incumbent upon the deal exec and the integration lead to drive that boulder, rock, pebble approach. And different people call it different things. But you got to stay at the boulders until you can move to the rocks, and you got to stay at the rocks level to get to before you can go to the pebbles, which is really the in the weeds, really detailed kind of stuff that kind of, even there you can draw a line like, do we really need to do this now? Or do we need to do it at all? Do we need to do it now? Or can we delay it for a while? So I think simple is hard. I've talked about that frequently in my deals. I actually had somebody on my team last week, literally like, I'm tired of you saying simple is hard. Like, if it's hard, then it's not simple. I was like, well, that's where you're confused. It's up to you to figure out how hard you want to make it. And like, you figure out what's the next step we need to do, and does it align still with the outcome or the North Star? And then you take the next step and then do that gut check. Are we still aligned? Yes or no? It is simple is not simple. Simple is hard. And you kind of leave it up to people to figure out what that really means to them. Some people love complexity, and for them, complexity is simple. But if they're out of sync with the rest of the team, then it's a different discussion.
Yeah, I like how you talk about how you guide the teams to, keep with the goals, keep things simple. That's probably super helpful during these times of massive change, right?
We all kind of, at least my experience, I'll speak for myself. If I'm left alone too long with my own thoughts about things, I'm likely going to come with, my reality is going to be different than somebody else's. So I think like those frequent integration meetings where you just like check in with everybody, and is the IT team aligned with the product team in terms of, where's the repository for the source code? Where are you guys going to put the products? How are we going to test them? What's the release process and the build process look like? What's that platform we're going to run it on? All those kind of things that you get really wrapped around the axle on. And it's like, okay, is this all going to be in the cloud? Is it all going to be in-house? Is it all going to be on-prem? Like, again, those are really simple questions that can have really complicated answers to them. Because the worst response you can get on those questions is, I have a colleague that I work with who we laugh about this frequently. It's like, it depends. It's like, it depends on what? What does it depend on? Because let's get over that now. Remove the dependencies.
Yeah, your comments are making me think of some situations that I was in. So you talk some more about the acquisition fatigue that you were experiencing, because I see it happening not just, to your level, but the whole team. Especially, so I was thinking, so you've been working in environments where there's multiple acquisitions, and I've seen some companies where I've been involved in where every time there's an acquisition, there's a transition and integration, and it's thrown to all the existing people over and over, and they're constantly having to do their own job. Plus it's not a one-time thing. It like keeps happening. So what is your kind of take on how to deal with that and how to fix that? Because these people can't go through that overwork over and over. And then, to me, they kind of become less efficient. Things fall through the cracks all the time. And you can just see all these things happening, but they tend to not necessarily want to hire more people just for a temporary acquisition that's supposedly a temporary thing. But I mean, there's so many things that go on, after the acquisition. So
I would say most of the people that I've hired on my teams over the years, I look for people that know how to pace themselves. In my mind, because I am a runner, I think, is this person a sprinter or are they an endurance athlete? Because M&A for me is largely about endurance. Yes, the deal has a pace and a certain speed to it. The execs want the deal done and we want to own this and then we want to have our way with it kind of thing. And I think it's the integration lead's role to understand what that really means and how much latitude there is. And so I've been at VMware twice. I was recruited from Microsoft in 2010. And then I was recruited away from VMware by PayPal post their split from eBay to set up their M&A integration practice in 2016. And then I was recruited from PayPal back to VMware in 2019 when they announced that they were doing two concurrent public transactions, Pivotal and Carbon Black. Literally almost signed on the same day, within a month of each other. So they were flat right on top of each other. And they were big deals. One, they were public, which has a different level of rigor than a private deal around due diligence and the pace and what you can drive in terms of speed and what do you really need to pay attention to. I was able to offset the teams in those deals a little bit, but we actually had to bring in an outside we actually had to bring in Deloitte to help us, which is an expensive way to go. But we didn't have the team I came back to, which was the team that I had originally built. They just weren't big enough. They could handle serial deals with some overlap, but there was no way they were going to handle, 4,500 employees.
Right.
High single digit revenue between the two companies, big sites, big footprints, global, certain complexities in terms of the technology, et cetera. So I think it's up to the integration lead to understand what people are capable of and understand before the impact hits the employees. M&A has this sort of appeal to it. It sounds really interesting and there's sort of this vibe about it and I'd love to try it. And then they get into it and they're like, you guys are nuts. This is
right.
You guys are literally crazy people. And I don't believe we are crazy by definition, but I do think it's incumbent upon us as leaders. And you have to have kind of thick skin and you have to kind of know how to pace yourself. And you have to also understand what the real work entails, knowing that it's never easy. And people have to get comfortable with it because otherwise they are going to burn out. They are going to get frustrated. They're going to throw their toys out of the crib and go do something else. I'm pretty transparent when I hire a new team member. You know what you're getting into, right? Because I believe that there are a lot of people in functions like finance, as an example, that are really good integration people because finance in any company of size, the entire business intersects through finance. And it's either data input to generate financials or output in terms of reporting financials and or managing budgets and forecasts and that sort of thing. So they're really used to that sort of complexity.
Yeah.
But then it's like testing for, because it's also, finance is largely a 13-week cycle, right? Once a quarter, you do this, then you do that, then you do that, then you close the quarter, and then you do it again. M&A is not like that. You can have a playbook, and you should have a playbook, but you should also understand it's not, every deal is like a snowflake, as a former Microsoft colleague told me. They're all different. The principles are the same, trying to drive to an outcome. You want to have some consistency in your approach, but every company is different. Big, small, international, all sorts of things that create the complexity. And you got to help people understand, this is what you're getting into. So I'm just going to tell you, it's not going to be easy. And at times you're going to get frustrated.
Yeah. I noticed there are some personalities that really do thrive on that chaos, that kind of, fixing things, problem solving, constant problem solving. And then there's other personalities that it's harder for them to kind of be in that environment.
Yeah, they want stability. They want repeatable. They're comfortable with that.
Yeah.
That's a huge reason why I got out of finance. I love chaos and ambiguity, which is,
Mm-hmm.
the core foundation of M&A is how
Mm-hmm.
much chaos and ambiguity can you tolerate?
Yeah, me
But
too. I'm the same way. I don't know
yeah, I
why.
mean, I don't know whether I have ADHD or some level of lack of focus or whatever,
Right.
but I love the fact that every deal is different. The exec teams are different. The employee base is different. The technology is different. The footprint's different. All that. I was like, this is new. This is great. Let's go figure this
Yeah,
out.
I always noticed, I mean, just to relate to that, I think one of the things I like about being involved in chaos is you can find opportunities. I don't know, I just feel like there's more opportunities to be found and more things that you can fix for the better during chaos.
And it's rarely, if ever, rinse and repeat. The core findings that can help accelerate value creation or problem solve is typically found in an environment of chaos, is my
Mm-hmm.
experience. So again, I think I became an endurance ultra runner because of M&A, not vice versa. Because
Mm-hmm.
ultra runs are all about problem solving. Like, do I have enough calories? Do I have enough fluids?
Mm.
Do I have a blister building on my foot? And do I stop now and take care of that, or do I do it later? Well, if I wait later, what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you're doing this while you're trying to run. And M&A is so much like that.
Yeah.
You're moving forward. You're problem solving while you go forward. The solution might create yet another problem downstream.
Right.
And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
how do I need, maybe that's a
Mm-hmm.
big opportunity for
Well,
AI is
and being a
to help.
parent too. I mean,
That's even,
right? Reminds me of
yeah,
being a
exactly.
parent.
It is. No, and parents, at least my experience too, is
Mm-hmm.
most parents are endurance athletes. How does somebody in their 20s, 30s,
Mm-hmm.
40s deal with a 2-year-old that's running helter skelter and not feeling
Right.
well, but doesn't want to lay down? And what do I do?
Exactly. So one other question about just people, the employee impact on these M&As, and this is the topic that nobody likes to talk about, but how do you, I guess, balance the line between, the cost efficiency and the employee impact of reorganization and layoffs?
Yeah, which is a frequent topic for M&A teams, right? Because if M&A is slow, like, what are these people going to do? And then an M&A comes along and people have either moved on from the company or into a different role. And then do you hire a backfill, or do you go out external? Every company has a different approach to that.
Mm-hmm.
Some say I need one or two really experienced leads,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're going to and then they'll bring in outside contractors or consultants to
Mm-hmm.
fill out the rest of the team based on the size and complexity of the deal. I tend to want to have a core team that's
Mm-hmm.
consistent. And what I've learned is those same people that do M&A integration really well can run enterprise-wide projects really well that are not at all related to M&A.
Mm-hmm.
And I continue to be perplexed and flummoxed by the level of resistance to that by most companies. We're like, no, if you're M&A, you've got the tattoo and that's all you're going to do. And I'm like, no, then you don't understand what we do. Let me help you understand what we do. We're the best problem solvers in the entire company because we know how IT works. We know how product is built. We know how HR is. We know how to hire, fire, enable, comp, benefit. We know how to drive all those processes, and we can help your teams do that depending on what the project is you might be considering. I think
Mm-hmm.
many companies are starting to learn that because we're a fungible resource. The organic and the inorganic is not that different. It's really not. I mean, the pace and the expense and the visibility and all that is different with inorganic. Well, you guys run $100 million projects or $500 million or $1 billion
Mm-hmm.
or $5 billion. That's not the same. It's like
Mm-hmm.
valuation has nothing to do with it. Valuation is a headline number. It's a PR release. It's the
Mm-hmm.
work underneath that really is what drives value.
Yeah.
Because you drive value creation organically doing the same thing. But
So what
most.
factor actually makes integration harder? Is it the industry? Is it the people? Is it like the culture? Like what is it about an integration that would make it harder or easier?
So the short answer is yes. It's all those things.
Okay.
But it scales on each deal. Again, if you understand what the agreed to outcome is that you're driving to, then you remove a lot of the headwinds or the friction to any and all of those. So I think, again, it goes back to, do you know what we're driving to? Do you know what we're driving to? Are you both aligned on what we're driving to? And then, it's a geometric progression. 2 becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16 kind of thing. Teams are largely scaled based on the size and the complexity of the deal. But I think any and all of those things influence what happens. And it can be different. Like, again, if you do an acqui-hire for, let's say, a business that's sub 10 employees, are all 10 of those key to the success of the deal? Again, what is the outcome you're trying to drive to?
Yeah.
Is it to incorporate and enable that technology and or products as part of your core product offerings? Yes or no? Okay, who works on each of those technologies?
Right.
So do you need 5 of them? Or you have to pay them a boatload of retention money to stay because all 10 are important? Those are really hard discussions and really hard and challenging decisions to make.
So we're kind of almost through our discussion here. So we're going to talk a little bit about technology, and then we're going to get some of your advice going forward, and then we're going to close out. But I wanted to get your input on, AI and how that's impacting integration or due diligence, and kind of how you use technology and how it's changing in your world. It's a loaded question, right?
It is, absolutely, because in all transparency, I've only poked around at AI. I'll have to use Google to look up certain terms around AI to understand what they mean. That's how much of a neophyte I am. I do believe that AI will have a significant role in M&A going forward. I don't think it's there yet. I think it's going to create an environment where possibly too much information is just going to complicate things.
That's a good point.
Well, not too much. Yeah, too much data and too much information. I'm a big believer data creates information, not vice versa. So where do you draw the line, and how much data do we need to make the next right decision or informed approach around all things M&A? I think the real value is time. I think AI will create an acceleration. But again, I'll use my running analogy. The ability to run a 60-second 400 doesn't really help you when you're running 100 miles. It doesn't scale. It means you can run fast for a short distance, but when you're running 100 miles, you're just trying to stay alive for 30 hours while constantly moving. And those are very different approaches. That's kind of how I would view AI based on my largely uninformed understanding today. I did a lot of due diligence on companies with banker boxes full of paper documents, just to kind of date myself. You get stuffed in a conference room at a law office and say, here's everything you guys asked for, knock yourselves out. And then the virtual data rooms came to be, which are hugely efficient and created that ability to do things faster. You didn't necessarily have to travel. You didn't have to survive, 8 bazillion paper cuts, but you had to get used to it. It was different. So I think AI is similar to that analogy.
Right. Yeah. I just reminded me of a time when I had a team that had to go to a different city altogether and review contracts in a closed room that was not connected to the internet at all because of the security of it. And they would have to literally go in this room and review everything and capture all the data that they wanted pretty much manually. And that was it. And there was no shared files. There was no clouds being used or anything. So we've come a long way.
Then you go through that paper documentation, frequently have a question about it. And then you got to go find whoever provided that piece of paper
exactly.
or that manila folder. You're like,
right.
What is this? This was in response to this question. What does this mean? Like, this doesn't make any sense, or it makes too much sense. Like, something's missing.
Okay, cool. So one last question, and this might be a little loaded, but I know you kind of touched on some of this already, potentially. Going back to your younger self, your first big integration, what's one piece of advice and one thing you wish someone had warned you about?
So for me, it was to not pretend that I knew everything. I went into it. I had no idea what I was getting into. The first big deal was not like the very first deal that I did. It was completely different. And I thought because I had a few deals under my belt that I knew a lot, and couldn't have been farther from the truth. And it humbled me, quite honestly, because I made mistakes. Fortunately, they didn't crater the deal, but I had to humble myself in front of high-level corporate execs and say, yeah, I thought this was the answer, but here's what I've since found this is the answer. And they asked me like, well, why did you think you knew the answer the first time?
Mm-hmm.
I said, because I thought I knew everything. It was very humbling. I am happy to admit what I don't know nowadays, which is a lot. That I think is important, but I think that's not just M&A related, right? That's probably one of those life learnings as well.
That's a really good answer. It's a really good answer,
thank
though.
You. Everybody wants to think they're the expert in what they do, and I got into that whole M&A is like, this is what I want to do. I know in my heart and my soul, this is what I want to do. I'm no longer in the rinse and repeat kind of roles I've had in the past. Like, this is it. This is my nirvana. And I know I've done 3 deals. I know so much. And I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
I knew how to work hard.
It goes back to being a parent. I mean, I have more than one kid, and I was expecting the second one to be like the first one, and personality's completely different. So I try to apply all the things I did with the first one, and it totally backfired.
Yeah, it does kind of go to problem solving. The issue is identifying the problem and then knowing who to talk to about what the answer or solution might be to that problem, knowing that there's a follow-on problem right behind that one that has 287 problems behind that. And that's what I kind of realized was this stuff is hard. This is hard work. It's not always complicated, but it is really, really hard work. And you have to be able to kind of go, is this a people kind of thing? Is this a technology thing? Is it financial? Like sometimes it's all 3. And I will just say, you kind of got to hang in there and do a number of deals. I don't know what that number is. For some, it's less. For some, it's more. Some people never get it because they're just like, this is just too hard. I don't want to do this. It's like my snarky response is, well, that's why it's at-will employment. Like, you can opt out.
Yeah. Well, you obviously love what you do. I mean, you wouldn't be doing it for this long, I don't think.
Nope. No, I love it. I absolutely love it.
Good. Well, it was really nice to have you on our podcast, and I appreciate your time and giving our audience a lot of awesome insights into the M&A world. Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity. I love talking about what I do. I love talking about M&A. I love talking to people that want to know about M&A. I'm happy to, if people want to reach out on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm happy to engage and provide what I've learned, what I've not learned. And, I'm at a point in my career where I am firmly in the position to give back. Like, my career I don't need any upward to the right trajectory anymore. What I find, and this is interesting, Lisa, is I was telling my wife this the other day, is like, I've spent most of my career looking for the brass ring. And the recent past, I've realized, like, I've got the brass ring. I don't need to look anymore. And the level of peace that created in my life is profound. Like, you know what? I'm actually okay. My career is what it is, and it's okay. It's a really solid body of work that I can be proud of. And I'm there. And it's like, she goes, wow, it took you a long time to figure that out.
Right.
So, yeah, but it's all good. I love it. So I'm happy to be a resource to whoever I can be helpful to.
Great. And I would like to encourage the audience to also check out Jim Buckley on another podcast that he was on, and he's got them posted on his LinkedIn page. Lots of great information there as well. So again, thank you. So thank you for tuning in to M&A Plus, the art after the deal. We hope you've gained valuable insights from today's conversation with Jim, a true leader in M&A integration. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with colleagues and friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more discussions on what really happens after the deal. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries, creating value, and refining the art after the deal. Bye for now.